My husband got promoted, but what his black boss asked from me changed everything. When my husband, Daniel, came home that evening with the biggest smile on his face, I knew something amazing had happened. He dropped his briefcase at the door, scooped me into a hug, and whispered, "I got promoted." My heart swelled with pride. After everything we had been through, the late nights, the missed dinners, the silent prayers, it finally paid off. We laughed, we danced in the living room like two teenagers, and for a moment, it felt like nothing could go wrong. But life? It has a strange way of testing you when you least expect it. A few days after the celebration, Daniel's new boss invited us to his grand house for a small get-together. His name was Mr. Carter, a tall, commanding man with a deep voice and a sharp gaze. He welcomed us warmly, but there was something about the way he looked at me, something that made my skin prickle. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was overthinking. The night moved slowly. Laughter filled the rooms, glasses clinked, and stories were shared. But when Daniel stepped outside to take a call, Mr. Carter approached me. He leaned in, his voice low and steady, and said something that made my blood run cold. I stood there, frozen, clutching my glass tighter as his words echoed in my ears. Everything we had worked for, everything Daniel had dreamed of. It suddenly felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I couldn't tell Daniel, not yet. I needed time to think, but deep down I knew. Nothing would ever be the same again. The drive home that night felt longer than usual. Daniel was humming to the radio, still caught up in the happiness of his promotion, while I sat stiffly beside him, staring out into the darkness. I wanted to tell him what Mr. Carter had said. I wanted to scream, but I stayed quiet. Every time I opened my mouth, fear closed it again. The next morning, I woke up hoping it had all been a bad dream. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But when Daniel announced that Mr. Carter had personally invited him to a special meeting later that week and insisted I come along too, my heart sank. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal. I cleaned the house, cooked Daniel's favorite meals, even laughed at his silly jokes. But inside, I was battling a storm. What exactly did Mr. Carter want from me? Why had he spoken those words with such certainty, as if he knew I had no choice? And worst of all, what would happen if I refused? Daniel noticed the change in me, of course. He asked if I was feeling okay, if something was bothering me. I lied. I told him I was just overwhelmed by everything happening so fast. He kissed my forehead and promised everything was going to be perfect now. But I knew better. Something dark was creeping into our lives, and it had started the night we stepped into Mr. Carter's house. I found myself replaying the moment over and over. The way he smiled, the way he spoke. It wasn't just a casual comment. It was a demand, a condition, something unspoken but dangerously clear. And Daniel? He had no idea. Every day that passed felt heavier than the last. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I kept wondering if Mr. Carter had done this before, used his power to manipulate people, to trap them where they couldn't say no. And if he had, how many others had stayed silent just like I was doing now? The special meeting was only 2 days away. Time was slipping through my hands, and with it, the life Daniel and I had built together. I needed to decide whether to protect him at all costs, or risk losing everything we had ever worked for. But deep inside, I feared the worst had already begun. The night before the meeting, I sat by the window, staring at the empty street. Daniel was asleep upstairs, his soft breathing filling the silence of our little home. I wondered if he could sense the storm waiting for us just beyond the horizon. My mind kept going back to Mr. Carter's words, the unsettling smile, the heavy silence that followed. I had never felt so trapped, so helpless. The next morning, I decided to do something, anything, to understand the kind of man Daniel was working for. I dug through old news articles, company reports, anything I could find. At first, everything looked perfect. Mr. Carter was praised for his leadership, for lifting people up, for creating opportunities. But between the glowing headlines, I found whispers, anonymous comments, rumors that never quite made it to the front page, stories about employees who suddenly left without explanation, promotions that came with unspoken agreements. No one ever said it directly, but the fear in their words was clear. I thought about telling Daniel, but what could I even say? That his biggest blessing was hiding a curse? That his dream job was slowly turning into a nightmare? He had worked so hard to get here. I couldn't just crush him with doubts, not without proof. Later that evening, while Daniel was taking a shower, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. Remember your promise. Don't forget to bring her. My hands trembled. It wasn't just in my head. This was real. My chest tightened with panic. I knew then that Mr. Carter wasn't leaving this up to chance. He expected me to come, and he expected me to obey. But what terrified me more was that Daniel might already know something and was staying silent to protect me, or worse, to protect his career. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where could we go? How could we fight something so big, so invisible? The meeting was just hours away now. As I packed my bag with shaky hands, I couldn't stop thinking. Was this the price of success? And if it was, were we willing to pay it? The drive to Mr. Carter's house felt like a slow march towards something I couldn't escape. Daniel kept glancing at me, his hand squeezing mine reassuringly, but even he couldn't hide the tension in his jaw. I knew he felt it too. Every mile closer made my heart beat harder against my chest. When we pulled up to the grand, shining gates, a cold shiver ran down my spine. The house stood tall and silent, like it was waiting for us. Mr. Carter's assistant greeted us at the door with a tight smile and led us down a long hallway, deeper into the house than we had been before. Everything inside was polished and perfect, but it felt hollow, like the walls were hiding secrets. We were brought into a private room, dimly lit, with heavy curtains blocking out the world. Mr. Carter stood by the window, his back to us, one hand in his pocket. For a long moment, he didn't turn around. The silence stretched so thin I thought it might snap. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but thick with meaning. "I trust you understood what I asked," he said, without even looking at us. My stomach twisted painfully. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me, but said nothing. Mr. Carter finally turned, his eyes landing directly on me. The weight of his gaze pinned me where I stood. He smiled, slow and deliberate, and I realized this wasn't about business. It was about control, power, and he believed we had none left. "You see," he said, walking toward us slowly, "success isn't free. It's earned. It's proven." His words curled around the room like smoke, suffocating and heavy. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but Mr. Carter held up a hand. "No need for words," he said smoothly. "Tonight, actions will speak for themselves." I looked at Daniel, searching his face for answers, for strength. But he looked just as lost, just as trapped. The reality of our situation hit me like a wave. There was no easy way out. Whatever happened next would change everything. Our marriage, our future, our very sense of who we were. Mr. Carter stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, and in that moment I realized we were standing at the edge of a line that once crossed, we could never come back from. And then he made his final demand. Mr. Carter's final demand hung in the air, heavy and impossible. My heart raced so loudly I could barely hear anything else. I expected Daniel to say something, to step forward, to shield me somehow. But he stood frozen, his hands balled into fists at his sides. For the first time, I realized he wasn't just caught off guard. He was conflicted. Mr. Carter stepped even closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for us. "Remember," he said, smiling thinly, "you both have a lot to lose." He turned and walked away, leaving us alone in that suffocating room. No orders shouted, no guards to lock the door, just the unbearable weight of choice crushing down on us. I grabbed Daniel's hand, pulling him to the corner of the room where no one could hear. "You knew," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You knew something like this would happen." His eyes darted away from mine. "I thought maybe he wouldn't actually ask," he said, barely audible. "I thought if we just played along, it would all pass." Hurt burned through me. He had brought me here knowing there was a risk. Trust, the very thing our marriage was built on, cracked beneath my feet. Before I could say anything more, the door opened again. But this time, it wasn't Mr. Carter who walked in. It was another woman, young, dressed sharply, but her face looked haunted, like she had already lived through what we were only just facing. She didn't say a word. She just handed me a folded piece of paper and left as quickly as she came. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it. The message was simple, scrawled in hurried handwriting. "You are not the first. You won't be the last. Leave now if you can." My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just about us. Mr. Carter had done this before, more than once, and people had stayed silent, maybe out of fear, maybe out of shame, maybe because they thought they had no other choice. Daniel read the note over my shoulder and went pale. For the first time, true fear flickered in his eyes. We weren't facing a man who made careless mistakes. We were facing someone who had built an entire system around silence and control. And now we were tangled inside it. Suddenly, voices echoed from the hallway. Heavy footsteps, laughter, sharp and mocking. Mr. Carter wasn't alone anymore. Other people were here, people who, for reasons I didn't even want to imagine, were part of whatever game he was playing. Daniel grabbed my arm, panic surging through him. "We have to go," he whispered. But the door behind us was no longer open. It was closed, locked, trapped. We had walked straight into the lion's den, and now it wasn't just about saving Daniel's promotion or protecting our marriage. It was about escaping with our dignity, and maybe even our safety, intact. But as the doorknob turned slowly from the outside, I realized it might already be too late. The doorknob turned, slowly, deliberately. My heart slammed in my chest as the sound of footsteps outside grew louder, and I knew that we had no more time. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open just as I felt a hand on my shoulder. Daniel flinched beside me. He didn't even need to say anything. We both knew the truth now. There was no way out of this without confronting it. Mr. Carter walked in, flanked by two of his associates. The air in the room felt dense, suffocating, as they surveyed us with cold, calculating eyes. He didn't waste any time. His voice was low, almost casual, but I could hear the edge in it, the control he thought he still held. "Did you think you could escape?" he asked, his gaze shifting between me and Daniel. "You're already in too deep." I could feel Daniel's hand trembling, but he stood tall, trying to mask his fear. "What do you want from us?" he finally demanded, his voice rough. "We've done everything you've asked. We've played your game." Mr. Carter smiled, slow and deliberate. "That's the thing," he said, stepping closer. "You haven't played yet. You haven't made the right choice." I wanted to scream, to ask him what kind of monster he was, but I didn't have the strength. Instead, I felt the quiet panic creeping in again, the dread that we would be forced into something we couldn't walk away from. But then, just as Mr. Carter moved to say something else, the unexpected happened. The door slammed open behind him. Another woman stepped into the room, but this one wasn't just an observer. She was holding a file, a thick one, and her eyes met mine, familiar eyes. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. It was the woman who had given me the note. "I'm not afraid of you, Carter," she said, her voice sharp and full of conviction. "I was the one who warned her, and I'm not the only one." She threw the file onto the table, and the room fell silent. Mr. Carter's expression faltered for the briefest moment. "You don't know what you're doing," he snapped. The woman ignored him and turned to me. "You're not alone in this," she said quietly. "There are others, people who've been trapped just like you." The tension in the room shifted. Mr. Carter's calm exterior cracked, just for a second. But it was enough. Daniel's grip tightened around my hand as I realized that what we thought was our downfall had been a setup. We weren't the first to fall into Mr. Carter's trap, and we wouldn't be the last. But the power had shifted. The game wasn't his anymore. The woman smiled at me, then at Daniel, and without saying another word, she walked out of the room. The door closed behind her, and we stood there, stunned. Everything had changed in that single moment. The weight in the air lifted, but a new understanding settled in. There was more to this than we ever imagined, and as we left that house, I knew one thing for sure. This story was far from over. We left Mr. Carter's house that night, both of us quiet, lost in our own thoughts. It was as if the world outside had turned into a blur, the once familiar streets now feeling like they belonged to someone else. We didn't speak much during the drive home. What could we say? Everything we thought we knew had been turned upside down. The woman who had stepped in, the one who had given me the note, she had changed everything. Her words echoed in my mind. "You're not alone in this." For the first time, I understood that we weren't dealing with just a single manipulative man. There was a network, a web of power that stretched far beyond the walls of Mr. Carter's mansion. But we didn't have to fight it alone anymore. When we finally reached home, Daniel turned to me. His expression had softened, and the tension that had gripped him earlier was gone. "We'll get through this," he said quietly, but this time his words didn't feel empty. They felt real. "We're not in this fight alone. We can take this down, together." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. It wasn't just about standing up to Mr. Carter anymore. It was about taking control of our lives, our choices, our future. Whatever had happened, whatever was still to come, we knew now that we had the strength to face it. The next day, I made a decision. I reached out to the woman from the night before, the one who had warned me. She had promised us we weren't alone, and now it was time to take action. She connected me with others, people who had faced Mr. Carter, who had been crushed by his power, but who had refused to stay silent any longer. Together, we began to expose the web he had spun, to dismantle the carefully built empire of manipulation and control. The following months were hard. There were moments of doubt, moments where I feared it would all fall apart, but we kept going. Slowly but surely, Mr. Carter's empire crumbled. It wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about reclaiming our voices. And by the end of it, we had done more than just survive. We had rebuilt our lives. As we looked back, it became clear that the real victory wasn't just defeating the man who tried to control us. It was realizing that no matter how dark things got, we always had the power to choose. And in the end, that was the most freeing thing of all.